Good day. I am Ann Mazikowski, President of the League of Women Voters of Central Delaware County. And on behalf of our league, I want to thank you for joining us for our hot topic, Voters Beware of PA Constitutional Ballot Questions. The mission of the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization, encourages informed and active participation in the citizenship elections and democracy, and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. Today's program, suggested through the work of our Civic Education Committee, is all about informing our communities to advocate for good governance, and when you vote, to understand the process, importance, and possible consequences of constitutional amendment ballot questions, and the increasing attempts to misuse them by the PA legislature as a political strategy for partisan gain. So to that end, I will introduce our moderator, Jodine Mayberry, our league member who is the editor of our newsletter, The Voter, and chair of our Legislative Advocacy Committee. Her advocacy work is featured in our newsletter, plus legislation action posts, which can be found on our website, lwvcdc.org. Jodine will now introduce our panel of presenters.
Hello, everybody. What a great crowd. So I'm going to introduce our four presenters very, very briefly, and then let them talk about themselves, and then we will get into the nitty-gritty here. Our first presenter is Susan Gobreski. She is on the PA LWV board and is the chair of its government policy committee. She's been a community advocate for 25 years and currently serves as a consultant to the Keystone Research / Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. I think we're mostly familiar with that. And a principal consultant to the Sedgwick Group working on community issues. Danielle Ohl, am I pronouncing that right? Danielle Ohl? Yeah, okay. Danielle is the Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA, which I have to say, those of us on the League of Women Voters, many, many readers have come to cherish the Spotlight PA's work because there's been such a lack of coverage of what goes on in Harrisburg. And we hope that Spotlight PA is around for a long time. Danielle worked at the Capitol Gazette in Annapolis, Maryland, where she won a Pulitzer Prize special citation for her own coverage of the mass shooting in the Gazette newsroom. You may remember, I think 5 people were killed. And she's also worked with ProPublica's local reporting network. Kadida Kenner is the executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project, which is modeled on the New Georgia Project that Stacey Abrams started. And their work is primarily getting to unrepresented minority groups, getting them to register to vote, mobilizing them to vote, and those kinds of things. And she is also co-chair of Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania, which is an advocacy campaign to protect the independence of our state and federal courts and educate the public about their importance. And she's going to have a lot to say about one particular proposed amendment here in a little while. Khalif Ali is the executive director of Common Cause PA. He previously served as director of public policy and advocacy with the Pittsburgh Foundation, and most recently led the 2020 Pennsylvania voter engagement campaign for the National Urban League. All of us are allies in this effort to expand access to voting. So starting with Susan, and maybe going counterclockwise. You're counterclockwise on my screen anyway. I'd like to ask Susan to just talk a little bit about PA LWV and what she does for them, for us.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Gobreski. I currently serve as the chair of the state government policy work for the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. I've actually been in that position for just under a year. However, I've been involved with democracy issues and citizen advocacy for a long time. As I think people are aware, the League of Women Voters, it works to empower voters and defend democracy, has a keen focus around civic engagement, working both at the state level, but also a majority of the work is done through local leagues. And so it's been an active time. We've actually been involved in litigation around redistricting and around the subpoena of private voter data and the investigation of individual voters by the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee pertaining to the ballot issue and the subpoena of information by that committee, and working to make sure that Pennsylvania has a full suite of policies to protect our democracy, and working to defend against proposed changes that would harm or infringe upon voter rights. I think we're just doing introductions, right? I'm not getting into the
Yes, just
content of the constitutional
right,
amendments.
right.
Okay, so that's me. Sorry, that was too long then.
Danielle?
Thank you. I'm glad. Thank you to everyone for organizing this. It's a great topic.
Okay. Danielle?
Yeah, hi, my name is Danielle Ohl. I am a Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA. I've been doing this since August, but I am from Pennsylvania originally, so it's good to be back and interesting to be digging into the laws of the state that I grew up in, which I had no idea about. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as a Capitol reporter, I am covering the legislature and, kind of the breaking stuff, but also the things that people might not be as keen to, like constitutional amendments. And we put together earlier this year, a tracker so people could, look for themselves and stay informed about the questions that they could potentially see on an upcoming ballot. And actually, we just updated that today to be a little bit more user-friendly. So if you guys haven't looked at it recently, feel free to go ahead. It should look a little bit less chaotic and text-heavy. So yeah, happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Kadida, tell us about your organization, both of your organizations.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kadida Kenner. I'm founding executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project and the New PA Project Education Fund. And I'm also here today representing Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania as co-chair. And so the New Pennsylvania Project, which was founded just last May, so we're not even a year old yet. And as Jodine mentioned, we were founded in the spirit of the New Georgia Project. It is our mission to register the more than 1.1 million Pennsylvanians who are eligible to vote but not registered to vote in this moment. And it is our goal to register 50,000 of them here in 2022. And we'd love to get to 200,000 of them by the 2024 election. We know that every single vote counts. And so it is our mission to reach out to those constituents who have been disenfranchised functionally and politically, and to have them re-enter the electorate or join for the first time and build power in these communities so that our needs start to be met. And with Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania, that's how I know most of you here. I see some friendly faces like Gene Weston and others. The work of traveling the state when we were able to do that and talking about the importance of the federal courts and making sure we're protecting the independence of our courts. And I'm still reveling in the joy of having Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson nominated to be a Supreme Court Justice for the United States of America. And so looking forward to that confirmation process happening this month. Thank you.
All right, and Khalif, if you would talk about Common Cause.
Sure. So first, thank you for having me. Common Cause Pennsylvania, well, Common Cause in general is a nonpartisan, nonprofit advocacy organization that focuses on government accountability and educating people. Right? So a lot of the work that we do at Common Cause Pennsylvania is sort of hinges on this idea that most of us, the vast majority of us, still believe in the values that are associated with democracy. The flip side of that same coin is that, you know, there are many of us who might have some diminishing confidence in the ability of our government, as represented now, to address some of our major social and economic issues in this country. You know, so a lot of the work that we do is really focused on ensuring that decisions that are made by government are consistent with the values and values of democracy and the will of the people. So I'm very excited to add to the conversation today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're here to talk about the constitutional amendments ballot questions. We've heard a lot in recent days. I know Khalif has actually written quite a bit about it appears that the Republicans in the legislature want to use the amendment process to bypass the governor's veto and get a number of changes, a lot of them having to do with elections into the Constitution itself. I wonder, Susan, if you could talk about how that process works and what LWV's position generally is on amendments and about putting them on the primary ballot.
Sure. So, you know, I think a couple of things are worth really noting here, right? That the Constitution really was not intended to be a document to deal with short-term issues or popular issues, or even things like legislative, things that are more appropriately part of legislative or administrative codes. It was, you know, constitutions were meant to set a foundation and protect fundamental rights through some of those other changes. And our system of checks and balances are really important. And so thinking about the separation of powers, the checks and balances that exist in government, those are some of the issues that we think that are at stake here. So in order for something, and you made a reference to this, but one of the things that's happened is that in order to pass a constitutional amendment, the legislature has to pass it twice in 2 consecutive sessions. Our sessions are biennial, which means they last for 2 years. But things can happen actually in a pretty compressed timeline. And then it doesn't go to the governor for signature. So it is actually, turns out, a way to bypass the checks and balances of the governor's veto pen, which is a constitutional power he's been given. So the governor was vetoing things that the legislature didn't like. So they decided to start sending things toward the constitutional amendment process. However, it's really important to remember that, and then it goes to the voters, and the voters vote. And the other issue that there are no constraints on which election it gets put in, so it can be put into a primary where there's lower participation. People who are more partisan participate in primaries. Lots of independent and voters who are not affiliated with a political party, even though they can participate in a primary on things like constitutional ballot and ballot measures, constitutional amendment questions, they often don't, because they aren't invited to participate in the primaries for selection of candidates. So that reduces their participation there as well. So there are certainly other issues, and I think we'll get into all of them. But in terms of the leagues taking position on issues, first of all, we actually do have a position about, we generally support checks and balances, division of powers, and we have specific concerns about some of these specific issues. There's actually several foundational works, including from the National League. And Pennsylvania has a document called Where We Stand on Issues. And the National League is something, it's impact on issues. And so we have a policy agenda, and we use that as information to get guidance about our positions. And then if something is unaddressed by those foundational documents, the state league committee works to discuss it. We study issues and consult with local leagues to come to conclusions. Right now, we do have a general and broad concern about the set of amendments that are about how this process is being used in general, and about a number of the amendments that propose changes that would take authority away from the executive branch or the judiciary branch, infringe on the rights of voters, like impose very specific restrictions on voter ID. And voter ID is the appropriate topic for legislation. You don't put something like what kinds of ID are appropriate into a constitution, because ID changes over the years. So that's the approach that we're taking to this. A, what's going on with the larger process? B, what are the specific proposals? And how does that fit in with the league's body of work? And what issues in particular are threats to voting rights?
Danielle, going back to the spotlight tracker, it appears that there's only one possibility for an amendment to get onto the ballot sometime this year, and I believe that's HB 38, the judicial districting question. Could you talk a little bit about that, and could you talk about whether there's any possibility of any of the other amendments being finalized this year?
Sure, yeah. So yes, like you said, one of them would eliminate statewide elections for judges, as appellate judges, as we elect them now to the Commonwealth Court, Superior Court, and Supreme Court, and would draw districts, kind of the way that we elect the legislature or our congressional representatives. And the power to draw those districts would be in the hands of the legislature. So they would kind of have more control over the process of electing judges to the appellate courts. Another is far less controversial. There's an amendment that passed in the prior session that would eliminate separate ballots for judicial retention elections, just like puts it all on the same ballot. So that's a little bit less confusing. So that's a kind of a procedural change that doesn't have as much of an impact as the judicial gerrymandering, as some people have called it, would. So those are the two that are coming up, and it's not likely that they would be on the May ballot unless they get passed first thing when the judiciary comes back at the end of this month, because the State Department does need time to advertise these questions. And you'll remember that there was a constitutional amendment that was passed through the whole process that Susan described, and would have appeared on the ballot, and it would have given victims of sexual abuse a window to file suit against their alleged abuser, but the State Department did not advertise it properly in time for it to appear on the ballot. So, that was a major issue that the legislature is trying to fix with other constitutional amendments. So it can get a little bit confusing, but the tracker does have information on those bills that we mentioned. You can now filter it by like the progress that the amendment has made, recent activity, the date proposed, and the name. So you can also search it to look for, if you want to see things that have to do with the judiciary, or want to see things that have to do with, the legislature and how it works, or things that have to do with abortion. You can search those terms, and it'll show you the relevant amendments.
Hey, Kadida's also going to talk about HB 38, and I think she has a little cartoon to show us. Kadida?
Sure. Did you want me to just go into the whole? Okay.
Yeah, you can go ahead. You can show the cartoon if you want, or you talk about it first and then show the cartoon, whichever.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah, House Bill 38, otherwise known as judicial districting, or as it's been now called, judicial gerrymandering. We're all very familiar with gerrymandering here, League of Women Voters, I'm quite sure. And so, I just want to give a little preface about, how this bill came to be. And we have to go back to 2018, 2019, when we had a state Supreme Court, our Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that our congressional maps of 2011 were unconstitutional. and we had to redraw the maps. So we remember all that. We redrew the maps there for 2019. And so what happened in that situation is that we had legislators who were very upset that the Supreme Court ruled that way and changed our maps to make them more fair than they were. And so there was lots of attempts by our PA GOP-led legislature to disrupt the judiciary, to usurp the authority of the judiciary. They tried to actually move legislation that would impeach our Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices, but just the ones who ruled against the gerrymandered map. So we have to understand that history so that we can move into why House Bill 38 became a thing. Because if you can't win one way, you'll try to disrupt in another way. And that is what House Bill 38 is. It is an attempt to disrupt our judiciary, particularly our appellate courts, our intermediate and our Pennsylvania Supreme Court, by changing the way in which we as the electorate get to vote for those judges. Currently, we get to vote for all 31 judges who sit on our appellate courts. As Danielle mentioned, that's the Commonwealth, the Superior, and our Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We get the opportunity to vote for all 31. What House Bill 38 would do would change that, so we could no longer vote for all of those. We'd only be able to vote for 3, one for each court that the legislature would determine. We'd had them draw maps before. We know how that turns out. We don't want them to draw any more maps. And so I have a nice little explainer video to show you, because I can probably show you better than maybe I can tell you. And I'm going to take us all back to our Schoolhouse Rock days for a moment, if we remember those.
Hey, Pennsylvania. You know how we've been fighting gerrymandering, where politicians draw legislative maps that give them an unfair advantage and take away democratic power from voters? Well, those same politicians want to do the same thing to our judicial elections. Judicial gerrymandering changes how we elect judges to our state's highest courts, including the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We elect judges statewide today. A proposed constitutional amendment would give legislators the power to create districts to elect judges. And just as they gerrymander legislative maps to favor their preferred candidates, legislators would do that with judicial districts as well. So why is this so bad? It's pretty simple. Judicial districts are a solution in search of a problem. Look at our judges and justices, and you will see that they are from all over the state. But electing judges in districts could make it more difficult to put the best qualified judges on the bench in particular elections in the future. We want the best qualified candidates from the state to be judges in our courts, no matter where they are from. There is no Montgomery County or Elk County way to interpret statutes and the Pennsylvania Constitution. Most importantly, electing judges in legislator-drawn districts would undermine the independence of the courts and the separation of powers. Allowing legislators to influence who gets on our courts would enable them to influence the decisions they make, undermining the checks and balances so critical to our Constitution. Our appellate courts make major decisions regarding civil liberties and rights, educational funding, environmental protection, and gerrymandering itself. We must protect the independence of our courts.
So hopefully that was helpful for many of us out here trying to really understand what this means. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go back and turn this off. 1 second. Yeah, so, the questions are always posed, why is this bill coming to light right now? And it is coming to light, as I mentioned, is because there are some folks that are mad at our courts for the decisions that they've made. And this is a way to usurp the authority of our judiciary branch. And we know that we have checks and balances for a reason. And so we want to make sure that we continue to defeat House Bill 38. It will not be on this May's ballot. It's not within the 90-day deadline that they have to get this all published in papers, et cetera. So we will not see this on this May ballot. We could see this on the November ballot because it just needs to pass one more legislative session. And if we are able to defeat this this time around for the November ballot, then it'll go away and start the process all over again, which will take another 2 years to do. So continue the great work, all of you who have been advocating to stop House Bill 38, which my friend Khalif likes to call a very emotional bill. drawn up by a very emotional man, Representative Russ Diamond out of Lebanon County. And it's bad not only for the judiciary, it's bad for us as voters. It disenfranchises us and it takes away our ability to vote for all 31 judges, just not the 3 that they tell us we can.
I think that that we as a league would like very much to put that video on our website, if that would be okay. Khalif, building on that, it would seem like, from the point of view of common cause, putting questions directly in front of the voters would be a very pro-democratic thing to do, and something that we should maybe generally want to do, particularly here in Pennsylvania, where we don't have the right of referenda. But I wonder if you could talk about why some amendment questions are not, it's not a good idea to put them before the voters. And you might want to refer back to Marcy's law, for instance, or the photo ID law that the League of Women Voters was able to defeat about 5 years ago. But however you want to answer that question, go for it.
So I think that's a great question. So let me begin by saying that so the way that we determine that there's abuse of a particular institution or process is by looking back on why the process was created, right? One of your colleagues, and a good friend of mine, Pat Beatty, wrote a beautiful commentary on the history of constitutional amendments. In there, he talks about, the reasoning for the constitutional amendment process was to sort of expedite a change in the Constitution without having the expense or the extensive this protracted process of calling it a constitutional convention, right? It wasn't an easy way to change it, but it was an expedited way of changing the Constitution. And that the constitutional convention is an extensive process. So we know that what we're seeing now is a direct result of a Republican agenda not being able to be fulfilled through a legitimate democratic process. There's a process in place for, as it's been mentioned before, for if there's dissatisfaction with a veto by the governor for the legislature to be able to overturn, if there's 2/3 majority, which they don't have. So there's this, I'll say this last part and then I'll kind of get into your question. There's this thought process that is very disturbing in not only Pennsylvania, but throughout this country, where if democracy doesn't yield the results that I want, then either I find a loophole or I tear down the institution that has affronted me, that hasn't given me the results that I like. And we know that that's just not how democracy works. But that's what we're seeing. And I think that the current use of the constitutional amendment process just sets a bad example for people throughout the country, and more specifically in Pennsylvania, because that's not how you get things done. That doesn't model democracy, So to your original question, the way that they're utilizing the constitutional amendment process just doesn't, it's not a fair process. It's not an ethical way of using the process. So the questions that they're putting forth are ones that are, number one, crafted in this very specific way to get people just to select yes. We know that most people just select yes when it comes to constitutional amendment. So not only are they selecting the issue, but they're framing it in a way that is going to yield a specific result. And they're even placing it typically in elections which have a very low turnout. So there's just a number of loopholes and a number of flaws in an overall process that's very unethical that is being used to advance a Republican agenda. So, I, even beyond getting into the specifics of a particular issue, Jodine, I'm just saying this process is total, the abuse of the processes doesn't allow for any fairness to occur.
But there are ways to defeat an amendment if it gets on the ballot and is passed by the by the voters. And the League of Women Voters has been very active in the last 5-6 years in actually defeating a couple of amendments. So Susan, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the photo ID amendment that we defeated, and also about Marcy's Law that we defeated. I think Marcy's Law was, it was just a feel good, oh, this sounds like it's a good idea to give the victims of crimes the same rights as the accused, and and I think something like 75% of the voters approved it. I think we're a little proud to say here in Delaware County that when we gave it some publicity, only 64% of the voters approved it. So so we were able to do some education there that had an effect. So Susan, would you talk about our work with those two amendments?
Sure. And let me just, a couple of things. First of all, I just want to thank Kadida for her amazing leadership on this work, and Khalif, what Khalif was saying was really important about this trend in, if we don't like the outcome of a decision where you go back and try and change the rules, part of living in a democracy is that we all agree to lose sometimes, right? Like I'll let you get your way and you let me get my way sometimes. We get to go out and make our case to the voters. And then if people don't agree with us, we lose. And then we wait for another day and try to become, more persuasive and more winsome in our positions. And that's not what's happening. And that's this stacking the deck issue. And so one of the issues around these constitutional amendments, and I will get back to some of the history, although I actually just would like to say for the record, I don't know it as well in terms of the details. I know the broad strokes, so I'll invite anyone who does to help add to this. But I guess the one upside of all of these constitutional amendments being proposed and people starting to hear more about it right now, and about why and what the motivation for bringing these forward is and what the content is. Somebody mentioned that voters have tended to just say yes. And I actually am a really educated voter, and I've done it too. I've been like, well, I guess if it made it this far, like, yeah, probably a good idea. Like, seems okay. Somebody would have stopped it if it was terrible. And so people tend to say yes, and they, and it's, fess up. But so I think that the upside here is that voters are going to have to become more discerning. We're going to have to work with people to say yes or no. So to your point about the work that you did in Delaware County, people are going to have to start saying, is this a yes or is this a no? And what do we do? And if there are 10 on the ballot, hopefully that will give people pause, and we're going to have to help work people through it. In terms of the work that has been done by the League of Women Voters in particular, part of what we've done is gone to court to help oppose amendments, even when they pass, on legality issues. And I am not a lawyer. I have watched a lot of Law and Order, but I'm actually still kind of only okay with my legal. But don't you guys think they should have Law and Order for constitutional and government issues? Wouldn't that be a fun case? I'd love that. This voter had this right. Dun, dun, dun. So anyway, so part of what we all also have to do is make sure that we are going to court and taking on the challenges that are necessary to be able to fight these issues if they turn out wrong. One of the people I would also like to acknowledge is that Meg Pierce is on this call. She's our executive director and helps make sure that the work of the state and the local leagues are cohesive. And she is absolutely fundamental glue. So Meg, I don't know if you want to say anything. Some of this legal work also preceded you, but you've been more involved with it. So I'm going to ask you to jump in and then ask if anyone else wants to add something here.
Sure. And I think the best thing to do in terms of referencing Marcy's Law is to look at the link that I dropped in the chat, which is talking points from the ACLU on really understanding why this was a bad idea. It's now defeated, which we consider a success. And it's just a really fine line to walk, because obviously we support victims' rights wholeheartedly. We just don't support the way that it was added to the ballot and the way that legislators attempted to pass it. So really helpful talking points on that. And I can continue to kind of drop information on Marcy's Law specifically into the chat if anyone wants to read more about it.
Okay, so moving on, we don't have a representative of Fair Districts PA here. But we all know, we've all worked on this issue of redistricting. And we know that that we've worked for the last couple of years to try and get a constitutional amendment to have a real citizens reapportionment commission. And we failed. And we failed primarily because of Republican opposition. But now the Republicans have introduced their own amendment, HB 2207, which they are calling a citizens reapportionment commission. So that will, I assume, follow the 2-session process and maybe get on the ballot eventually. So I wonder if any of you can talk about why that really isn't a citizens commission, and what we can do to try and slow it down or keep it off the ballot. Anybody want to talk about 2207? Nobody?
No, sure, I can.
Okay, you go.
So yeah, I mean, so 2207, it ultimately, I mean, similar to what Kadida was talking about with 38, it gives the legislature the ultimate say over who's on the commission. So it's really taking, I mean, there is, you know, Representative Grove, who is the main sponsor of the legislation, has, you know, argued that these are just going to be average folks or whoever, but, you know, ultimately it is the legislature that is deciding who is going to be on the commission. And right now we know that the legislature is overwhelmingly dominated by one party and will probably remain dominated by the GOP, even with, you know, even once the redistricting is settled up in the courts. So, you know, it's kind of a citizens commission in name only, because the people who are elected by these districts are the ones choosing the people who are drawing the districts. So, you know, it's hard to say that it's a true citizens commission, because the legislature is still involved and they have influence over the process. And, you know, I might add that the legislature, through other constitutional amendments, is trying to increase and has successly increased its influence over different branches of government. You know, we saw that after the pandemic, the legislature, you know, changed the way, I mean, severely curtailed the way that the governor is able to declare an emergency. You know, they are trying to do a similar thing with the way that the entire administration, the entire executive branch, you know, meaning all the departments, not just the governor himself, can promulgate regulations, a process that they already have a say in right now, but that they want the ultimate say in. You know, Kadida talked about how they're trying to change judicial elections to have control over that. They're trying to change, through this amendment that we're talking about, 2207, congressional elections. So, you know, this process, it is a process by which the question goes to the people. And, you know, Speaker Cutler has said, well, you know, we just want to leave it to the people to decide, you know, they're the ultimate say. But you'll notice which of these amendments gain traction and which don't. You know, there are over 70 potential amendments that have been proposed. You can look at them all in the tracker. And some of them are not controversial. You know, some of them have appeared many, many times, you know, as potential legislation. They would amend the way that veterans qualify for tax credits. They would change the way that the very unpopular, you know, school district taxes work. so that people who are no longer, have children or have aged out of, certain, there are things that have some consensus that I think would be a little bit less controversial, but those aren't really the ones that are moving along in the process. So, yeah.
Khalif, I wonder if that particular bill 2207 also provides for cutting out the governor. The current system, the governor can veto new maps, and then it goes to the court. And as we saw the other day, the U.S. Supreme Court is very hot to get a case before it where they can decide that the independent legislature clause of the U.S. Constitution cuts the courts out. So I wonder if you think the Republicans are playing a long game here, or if they're just reacting emotionally, to what's been happening.
You're talking my talk, Jodine. You're talking my talk specifically. So a couple things, right? So it goes back to the situation where if you are dissatisfied with a particular process, you decide that it's no longer a process that's valid, So the traditional democratic process of the legislature producing bills and passing bills and sending it to the governor's office is not an option in this case with the maps. And so, my issue with that is that you talked about a long game. So there's a number of nonprofit organizations, many of which represented here, who do statewide work and focus on specific issues related to democracy and do phenomenal work. So each of us working in our particular silo and focusing on a particular issue, voting, we were looking at audits, post-election audits, all these different things that we look at, looked at individually, we're just like, oh, okay, the Republicans are at it again. To your point, looked at collectively, what we're seeing, and I think many of my colleagues on here will agree with me, is just this what is essentially a power grab by a Republican-controlled General Assembly, right? So if you look at it, many of the bills taken in totality are going to, if they pass, if they go through the constitutional amendment process or even through the regular process, will vest the General Assembly with the power to manage elections as well as pretty much determine the outcome of every election with very little or limited or managed input from the courts. And this is not just in Pennsylvania, this is throughout the country, in which we're seeing a very subtle breach of separation of powers. So if you look at most of the bills that have anything to do with voting by the General Assembly, they kind of strip power away from the Secretary of State. That's an executive appointment, They mentioned, they in this case, 2207, they're stripping veto power away from the governor. So there's these very subtle things. HB 38, right, would gerrymander the courts and more than likely put a Republican majority in the appellate courts. So all of these very subtle things, and that's why it's important that we do and we continue as advocacy organizations to communicate with one another, because there is a longer game, there is a bigger picture, and we have to be working together and consistently communicating, coordinating our activities in order to put a halt to it.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that we're doing here today. Kadida, did you want to add anything about the discussion over the courts, cutting the courts out? Or anything? Anything?
Yeah. So, there's a few constitutional amendments being proposed that really violate the independence of our judiciary. We talked about House Bill 38, we talked about House Bill 2207, but there's also House Bill 1880 and 2141. 1880 is the one that actually would limit the terms of sitting judges. And so why this is important, it speaks to what Khalif is speaking about, is that this is like payback. This is payback to the courts for what they're doing, right? And this is something that legislators will hang over the heads of judges unless they actually rule on cases the way in which they want them to. So 1880 would limit the terms of the current sitting judges, not like later on, it's like right now, because we want the current judges who are sitting on the bench off the bench. So we're going to limit the terms of those currently sitting on the bench. 2141 would change the way in which we actually get to vote for retention, right? So we have nonpartisan retention voting after a judge has sat on a bench for 10 years. We then go to the ballot box and say yes or no to a judge. You don't see the D or the R after the name, you just see a yes or a no. And they want to change that as well, so that even our reelection or our retention of judges are through elections. This just brings more opportunity for dark money to come through, to make it harder for judges to be impartial, because they are campaigning for reelection after 10 years on a bench. So all of this is really problematic. And it's really an attack on our judiciary. And we really have to pay attention to that, because that is the purpose of this. It is an attack on the judiciary for the things that they are doing to rule maps unconstitutional if they're gerrymandered, or service the people, this is absurd. I mean, I just don't know how much more I can get into this. It's just that we have to see this as an attack on the judiciary for doing the right thing. And those of us in this room who are historians and appreciate history, this is happening over and over again. This happened in the 50s with the federal court and the Earl Warren Supreme Court. They didn't like the fact that they were overturning Jim Crow. And what did they want to do? They wanted to remove these United States Supreme Court justices from the bench. They wanted to impeach them based upon decisions they were making. The same thing is happening here today in 2022 in Pennsylvania. And we must fight back against these attempts to take away the independence of our judiciary. We have 3 separate co-equal branches for a reason. Not one is more powerful than the other. And what is happening is our state legislature is trying to usurp their authority and grab power away from the judiciary branch, because they see things slipping away from them. And this is unfortunate in this time.
Yeah, and they see the courts as being the bastions of democracy, as our Pennsylvania State Court has been for the last several years. Yeah. So this is for all of you. What other proposed amendments should we be concerned about keeping an eye on as these things go forward? Any in particular? The sexual assault window one, for example. No, I'm sorry. I'm not thinking of that one. I'm thinking of the one where they were just going to say that the governor and the lieutenant governor would run on the same ticket. And they got that through one time. And then now they've thrown a whole bunch of amendments on it. So they have to start all over again with that one. And I think that one of the amendments had to do with electing the Secretary of State, which is an appointed position now. So that I think we have to keep an eye on that one, because that, again, to Kadida's point, is doing whatever they can to change the rules.
Yeah, I can talk about 106.
Go ahead. Sure.
If you want. Yes, so that is Senate Bill 106, initially sponsored by Senator Argyle. That was an amendment with vast bipartisan support that, as Jodine is saying, would have put the lieutenant governor and the governor on the same ticket, like we, elect the president and vice president. It, in like a last minute, so it had passed, through the Senate. It had already passed last session. It was in the House. This was in December, right before we broke for, the holidays. They passed it with amendments, with 4, I want to say, different amendments that made it so that that lieutenant governor piece is still there. But yeah, there's 4 additional proposed changes to the Constitution. And I'm going to have to look at my story to remember what they all are, but they are, I believe one would require voter ID. One would require voter ID. One would limit the governor's power. Actually, 2 would limit the governor's power like I was talking about earlier with the ability to do executive orders or executive branch regulations.
And then there's the Auditor General to audit elections.
Auditor General to audit elections.
Yeah, that, I think that's before.
So I wrote about that, and I'll drop the link in the chat if you want to read about it. But yeah, so that, you know, that was kind of a last minute maneuver that, you know, when I talked to Senator Argyle, he you know, initially kind of talked about how the legislature has been using constitutional amendments because they feel the governor is vetoing things that are their priorities, and they feel like they should take it to the people. But, you know, he even said that he really hopes that these additional amendments, you know, don't tank this piece that he felt had bipartisan support and did have bipartisan support when it passed the first time. So that one, you know, even though it is something to watch out for, it has to go through the whole process over again. You know, but when the House did that, when the House Republicans did that, they restarted the clock because the rules say, you know, you have to pass the exact wording 2 sessions in a row. So now that they have changed the wording, that, you know, we're back to 0. So, you know, that one is back in the Senate now for, you know, consideration. It hasn't even passed. So, you know, it is interesting because it represented of really an escalation. And, you know, Khalif and I talked for the story that I dropped in the chat, and you know, I think he commented how it's, you know, it's really a circumvention of the process, and it's kind of a naked tactic that actually the Democrats went and mimicked to say, you know, hey, okay, so you're going to do this? Well, here are 30 amendments to this constitutional amendment that you guys are proposing that we'd like to see. And they did that on the floor, and then suddenly that item disappeared from the calendar that day. So, you know, it's getting to be pretty obvious that this is a way to circumvent the governor rather than a way to, you know, bring things to the people. So that's 106.
Can I comment on that? Can I comment on that?
Go ahead.
Jodine? So just very quickly. So, you know, I take issue with a lot of the way that this is being framed, but number one, that this is about the people, or let's take it back to the people. If there was any true interest in that, then we would make this a true referendum state in which the people would initiate the issue and bring it up for a vote. And they have no interest in that. Or there would be a 2/3 vote as opposed to a simple majority around these issues for 2 consecutive sessions. They have no interest in that. So, you know, I take issue with a number of ways that they frame that, but to try to throw it off on the people, I believe, is just nonsense, you know.
Okay, this has been a really, really interesting discussion, and I bet we could talk for a couple hours. But let's go to some of our questions. And I have a question. One of our attendees asked about how we can make it, or the legislature can make it more transparent to the voters so that they can be better informed of proposed amendments. I think that's one of the things we're doing here, and I think we're all of our organizations are about educating the voters. But if you have any specific thoughts on that, Khalif, you've talked about the 2/3 vote. There's also, you know, they have to advertise in the newspaper some period before the election. I'm not sure the period. And I suppose those things would make it more transparent. But any other thoughts, any of you?
Jump in here for a second. You know, yeah, they have to post it. Anytime they're going to put a constitutional amendment question on our ballot, they have to put it in 2 papers of record in each county 90 days ahead of the election, right? So that's the rule. That's what got our former Secretary of State in trouble, because one of those didn't make the paper in time, right? Here's the thing. How many people are actually getting a newspaper? How many people actually open up the newspaper? And then if I can actually show you a picture of what it looks like in the newspaper, because I can tell you, I'm someone who actually might read a newspaper. I would never read this. It would never come. I mean, it's nothing but a whole bunch of little words, no pictures, nothing fun about it to make, to grab your attention. This is not the way that we should be reaching out to the electorate, to them, inform them about something that is going to change our Pennsylvania Constitution, and we have no recourse to change it. Right. So number one, we're not getting, people are not, I'm sorry, I'm also a journalist by trade. People aren't reading newspapers. They're not, it's just not happening. We have to find a way to get people and reach them where they are to talk about these issues. This is wonderful. The League of Women Voters, we are all in our bubble, right? We love this stuff. Here we are in the middle of the afternoon on a Friday to talk about it. Right. But I tell you how many millions of Pennsylvanians who will not do this, what we're doing here today. And we have to find a way to get those folks. And it's left up to the good government groups like Common Cause, League of Women Voters. It's left up to grassroots organizations, hoping we can find funding to educate constituents out there. It's an institutional failure on the part of the state to not be able to educate the electorate when we're going to make changes that change our Pennsylvania Constitution for a life, for a lifetime, basically. It's been around since what, 68, Pennsylvania Constitution. We've only changed it a few times until the last few years. Now, all of a sudden, we're making all kinds of changes to the Pennsylvania Constitution. This is also not a sexy thing. This is not really a sexy subject to talk about. If I have 5 minutes in a room full of young voters, potential voters, there's some other things I might want to talk about. This might not make the top 3. Right. So we have to find a way to reach people where they are in the communities in which they live. Even when we think about the reapportionment committee hearings that happened, those were also, on college campuses or they were on Zoom. Not everybody has access to this. We have to make these things accessible to every Pennsylvanian. This is why we're in this circle that we're in right now, where we can't get people to cast a ballot because they don't believe in the political process. Well, this is why the political process is not available to them. So, I'm putting them out, I put this out here, I put out, the problem here. The solution is we have to find a better way to reach people where they are, to talk about all these issues. We've taken civics out of lots of schools. They're not getting this education. We're at the point now where only 1 in 4 high school student who is eligible to vote is registered. And that number is down to 15% in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We are not making this easy on ourselves or the electorate. And we're going to be in trouble as a nation if we can't get this together in this moment. This is the precipice right here and now. And we got to figure this thing out.
Yeah, and as I can say, as a poll worker, I am contemplating the nightmare of having people go into the polls and stand there and have to read and digest, 5, 10 constitutional amendments and make a decision on them right then and there. It's going to be a chaos. Khalif, did you want to say something as well about that?
Oh, it's just that. I totally agree with everything Kadida was saying. I think there's a multifaceted approach to it. Some of them are very simple. When we have these meetings, it's all of us, all very similar faces show up to each meeting. We all like, hey, what's going on? Hey, how you doing? What's up, Isaac? It's that whole vibe there. We all know each other, we family, and it's beautiful. The issue is that this is where it's contained. All of that knowledge, all those conversations stay right here,
right,
or on your hard drive, wherever this is recorded, and we don't go out and talk to people. See, the easy part is talking to people who agree with you. The hard part is going out there and talking to people who might not agree exactly as you do. But that's democracy, right? We get together, we talk, we debate. We agree not to agree, but we have an understanding for why we approach democracy the way that we do. And unless we can get to that, back to that, we're not going to be able to really push these issues the way we need to. Like there's not many, like Kadida said, there's not many people opening up the newspaper anymore and say, oh, look at this. It's just not happening that anymore. So we got to think about our individual roles in this as well.
Right. So who's monitoring the questions in the chat room? Is it Ann or Kathy? Do we have any good questions in the chat room?
We don't have any questions, but we have a lot of people endorsing what our panelists are saying.
Because we're all in our same bubble, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. But one thing I did want to mention is that our local league, Central Delaware County, is making a huge effort to register high school seniors. And I learned last night from the person who is in charge of going to Upper Darby High School that they have 1,000 seniors and they're working, can you believe it? 1,000 seniors in that high school.
Wow.
And they're working with the school to do a series of presentations and get them into, groups where they can actually register them. So I agree with.
I have a comment. I'll let you finish your promotion of this voter registration thing, but I do have some comments on the constitutional amendments.
And I have a comment on what Kathy's just saying also, and I'm sorry I can't put my camera on because I have no camera, but let me just jump in because it'll go with the flow, and then Laura can get to her thing. Kathy, on the subject of registering high school students, this was a topic that came up on a call this week between Fair Districts and the League of Women Voters, and our past president in Radnor Township, who is known to many here, Roberta Winters, has worked on that a lot, and she was advising some of the other leagues who, many leagues do voter registration and are committed to it, but not everyone has had success in registering youth. And what Roberta found really worked well, because it's hard to get all the high school students to go to one place at one time. At our high school, they are required to attend a rehearsal for the graduation. So that's where we set up our voter registration, because all the students who are graduating have to be there at that moment in time. And that has worked really well for us. So I just wanted to throw that suggestion out to others. And sorry, Laura, to interrupt there, but it just seemed to follow on what Kathy was saying.
It's okay. I just finally figured out how to get attention so I could comment on the constitutional amendment process, because we've done a lot of talking about constitutional amendments to the Constitution. Excuse me. These are not constitutional amendments, they're amendments to the Constitution. And we're talking about ones we oppose, but there are many that we support. And of course, there are issues we support that would require amending the Constitution. And of course, redistricting is at the top of my list right now. But there is also judicial selection, the election of judges. The League supports a judicial merit selection of judges. And also in the process area, the citizens initiative and referendum, which is not, we don't have that in Pennsylvania, and the League supports amending the Constitution so that we can get that going. And then there are things like the income tax, which is not progressive in Pennsylvania. And in order to have a fairer tax system, we have to amend the Constitution for that. The gas tax, under the Constitution, the gas tax can only be used to fund roads and bridges and that sort of thing. And it cannot be used to fund public transit. So that would require amending the Constitution. Of course, the whole process of funding public education, the Constitution blocks a lot of desirable pathways for making that funding more equitable. Gun safety, the Constitution prohibits local governments from passing laws that would regulate gun purchases. And I also remember mention something the League supports that we should be opposing, which is shrinking the legislature. This is a terrible idea. It may have seemed like a good idea at the time the League took a position in support of it, but when you look at that issue in light of redistricting, you can see what an awful idea that would be if we were to pass an amendment that would require us to reduce the number of members of the legislature in the absence of some kind of redistricting reform. So I'll just mention those.
Laura makes a very good point. And if you go and take a look at Spotlight's tracker, you're going to see a lot of those things in there. They're in there year after year after year after year. And because they're proposed by Democrats, they never get anywhere. They just sit in committee and then they die, and then they have to be brought back in the next session. So it's true, we do support a lot of constitutional amendments. Sadly, they're the ones that never get anywhere.
Some of them are even sponsored by Republicans. They're just not.
Some of them are.
They're just not, the leadership doesn't,
right.
has different priorities. So those are the ones that float along.
Right. Any other questions or comments?
If I can for a second speak to the youth vote. We all know how important it is to get young folks involved early. I'm someone who's in this work because my mom took me to vote with her when I was 6 and 7, and I never forget it. Right. So it's so important that we engage the youth. And I think that, a shout out to the League of Women Voters for what you've done, for decades, right, in terms of registering voters. And also keeping in mind that there's some new organizations that have popped up who are finding really innovative ways to register young voters. I think about PA Youth Vote is an organization doing a lot of voter registration of students in Philadelphia and Westchester and Norristown. And they're doing that by having other students engage students to register them to vote, the trusted messenger. And we can also not forget that we take responsibility for the folks that we're registering. And if we're not staying in contact with the people we register to ensure they actually get to the polls, we're actually doing a disservice, because we know that those who are most recently registered to vote are the least likely to actually show up to the polls. And so if we're registering somebody to vote, we need to make sure we have the capability to stay in contact with these folks to make sure they come out and vote in every single election. So I just want to uplift that and uplift the work of groups like PA Youth Vote and others who are really doing this work with student leaders, because we have to build, I look around this room, no offense here, right? I'm looking around this room, but we have to have some student leaders to take over this fight. And it's going to take the youth to do that, to motivate themselves, because no one is the more trusted messenger than a young person to reach out to another young person to get them engaged in this electorate.
Great ideas. Great ideas. Anybody else? Anybody in the audience want to comment or ask a question?
Can I comment just the last little bit?
Sure.
2 minutes, 1 minute, maybe even.
Yeah, go ahead. 3 minutes.
Issue I have with what's going on in high schools today, well, at least in Pittsburgh, no student government anymore. Like the actual practice of democracy in high school to prepare you or transition you into your own practice of democracy as an adult. Voting, running for election. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Holding office. These simple things. I know we talk about a lot about civics, which is the theory of democracy, right, in school. But what about the application of the actual practice of democracy?
Mm-hmm.
They've done away with student governments in most high schools in Pittsburgh, which I think is a travesty. But that's another topic. But I just want to share that food for thought.
Well, that's interesting. I don't think we were aware of that. And I wonder what it's the case around here. Do you think that came out of the pandemic? Or no, don't know. Ann Bush, did you want to say something? You're muted.
Thank you. The question I had was about how are we as a group going to educate the voters on these questions? There's so many confusing questions and ballot questions and also amendments. And I understand some of them, I wrote them down so I'd remember them, but where can we get the exact information so that we can educate the voters as we make calls or discuss it with people? And the other thing was someone suggested to me in answer to my question, a marketing plan. That was Becky, a marketing plan. Can we do that? Can we accomplish that goal?
Yeah, yeah.
So
I think
We
we could
had to help
model-
out.
I think we could model that on the election campaign that Roberta Winters ran last year with all different people talking about voting and 411 and all that. That would be a really good possibility. Put it on the yeah.
And I'll jump in here, which is with a couple of thoughts about that. So first of all, the league is actually working to make sure that there are tools and resources for all local leagues. There is actually a coalition, a state coalition of groups that are working together. Kadida is part of it, Khalif is part of it, the League of Women Voters is part of it, several of us. And we're working together to create sort of a larger framework. One thing to focus on right now is that a lot of these aren't on the ballot yet. They haven't actually moved into position to be on the ballot. So one of it is starting to educate your circle about the fact that this is sort of a growing concern and that we're going to need to pay more attention and be discerning voters as these issues come up, but we don't know which ones. So we don't want to spend all of our time and energy educating people about things that will never happen, because then people start thinking that the sky is falling. I think the work that Danielle did in Spotlight PA, we need to continue to support the role of an independent media that has integrity and that is fact-based in fact. So circulating some of that with a couple of thoughts, like constitutions aren't supposed to be documents that change with the times or every 2 years. They are supposed to be foundational documents talking about what's going on. I really love, I actually had a tracker, but when Danielle put this together, it was amazing. And I actually called her, I was like, this is amazing. We had like some of the legislative stuff, but much more usable and much more accessible. So I think sharing this information and saying to folks, like, I'm concerned about this growing trend of going to constitutional ballots, not that we don't want voters to decide, because we don't want to be people who say the voters shouldn't have a say. We want to be the people who say, listen, we've got to have a good policy process for making law, for preserving checks and balances. We're concerned about the overreach of the legislature trying to take powers away from other branches of government and give it to itself. So we need to be informed. There is a lot of work to do. I'm really grateful. Right. Sometimes people are like, why can't there be just one group? But there's so much work to do that we've got an amazing team of people across multiple organizations and our partners who are committed to truth and facts. Again, thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Kadida. Thank you, Khalif. So I think start there. Start getting your own leagues ready for the fact that this conversation is coming, but we don't need to rush into the streets just yet. Register voters, build your networks, build the number of people that you can talk to who will hear what you have to say. Those are the things to focus on right now.
Yes, and that's an excellent point. And I'd like to say on behalf of the league, here we are in a rare instance of being proactive instead of reactive. And we owe a lot of thanks to Ralph Graves and our Civics Education Committee, who put this thing together in like nothing flat, today's presentation. And we really need to say thank you to them, and we hope that they keep working on these issues, focused mainly on criminal justice issues, but did a great job throwing this together for us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So should we wind it up, Kathy and Ann?
Sure. Hi. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to all the presenters, to Jodine for moderating the panel. It's been really great. We've learned a lot as usual. So thank you. I'll use Khalif's term. Thank you for being in our bubble.
Yeah.
Now we want you to burst out of the bubble. And a lot of resources have been put in the chat, a lot of links. We're going to gather all those up. We're going to have the recording through the magic of Kathy Youngman, and we're going to share that out with all the people that register for this. And we hope that then they in turn start sharing it. Coalition, totally agree. It's the way to go. Our league, Central Delaware County, has put together what we're hoping will become the LWV CDC Voter Engagement Coalition of a lot of different groups in Delaware County, including our government groups, to work together to spread the word on good governance and what's important to the mission of the league. So once again, I really, really thank you for that. Big clap.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot.
And we'll be seeing you in the future.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.